Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. Thousands in favor of pro-life gathered in our nation's capital today, walking in the 49th annual March for Life. We take a look at their plans for protecting the unborn.
The solution is definitely better morals, going back to what truth is.
We have two prominent voices in the pro-life movement with us to discuss today's events and the mission behind them. One of these voices was a former director at Planned Parenthood. The Marine Corps announces an additional group of Marines will be kicked out for not getting the COVID-19 vaccine. We have the details. Despite the below freezing temperatures in Washington, D.C. today, this year's March for Life had a significant turnout. Folks traveled hours to the heart of our nation to stand up for protecting mothers and unborn children. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports.
It's that time of year again where thousands of people from across America come here to the nation's capital to march for life, even in weather below freezing temperature. We asked them what they're doing back at home to protect the unborn.
Going to the abortion clinics, praying. Michigan right now has 75 ultrasound machines that we've set in previous clinics all around the state of Michigan. They can see that there is a life there.
I believe we have to get involved, like in politics, in social media, in the media, to make people aware of the situation. Because if we don't, they are going to, and they are not promoting right values.
I think one of the things our churches do such a great job, but we do have to be able to offer more resources and support to our churches.
The 49th March for Life in the nation's capital attracted a sea of people this year. Enthusiasm is strong, with many of them expecting a change for Roe versus Wade.
We meet this year with fresh hope and heightened expectation.
I'm hopeful that we'll see big changes. I think people are waking up to the value of life.
The walkers marched along Constitution Avenue to the Supreme Court. Along the route were cheerful crowds.
Why are we marching?
Too close, move back.
To change legislation.
And signs of all sorts, trying to raise awareness. One walker points out that these images and facts about abortions may hit home for some, but she offers a message of hope.
And I would just want to tell them that God loves you, even if you've done that, He can forgive you.
But this movement is not limited to religious believers. A few young advocates tell us it's about human dignity.
You don't have to be religious to be pro-life. Like, it's a different subject. It's just think of humanity.
Because in the name of progress, many people have stepped over others. And I think we need to stop that. I think it's human dignity. People forget.
So how to restore this dignity?
I think the solution is definitely better morals, going back to what truth is, going back to what our founding fathers proposed, and that is that we hear everybody's opinions, we come to compromises and solutions based upon truth.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
With the largest pro-life rally in the world taking place today in Washington, D.C., we have two prominent voices in the pro-life movement here with us to discuss. Former director of a Planned Parenthood clinic and CEO at Intercessors for America, David Kubal. David, today's the March for Life. Besides the obvious message, what are some of the key issues that you're hoping to shed light on today?
Yeah, well, let's first recognize that today, the March for Life, it's the largest pro-life demonstration in the world. I was just over there just a few moments ago, and hundreds of thousands of people have flown in, driven in, taken buses, cars, whatever it takes to come to Washington, D.C. to make their voice known that they support life. And it's such an incredible year to consider that we are marching just right before what we believe will be the reversal of Roe v. Wade. So I believe this will be the last March for Life before Roe is reversed.
Abby, you were a director at Planned Parenthood. What led to your change of heart and to become a prominent voice in the pro-life movement?
Of course, yeah. I ended up leaving Planned Parenthood for several reasons, but primarily leaving after watching an ultrasound-guided abortion where I saw a 13-week-old baby fight and struggle for his life. And I knew then that there was humanity in the womb, there was life in the womb. And I knew that if those two things were true, then I was on the wrong side of this debate. And so I ended up leaving Planned Parenthood. And ever since then, I've been fighting to really expose abortion for what it is and try to help women find healing after having had abortions.
Now, David, proponents of abortion argue that restrictions on abortion will take away a woman's right and will ultimately hurt women. What do you say to that sentiment?
Well, what about the unborn women that are aborted? I mean, let's start with those rights. Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand that a mother a woman who's become pregnant has some very difficult decisions if she decides that that pregnancy was unexpected. But listen, life is precious, and pity a nation that does not consider life, protecting the most precious among us the best we can. And that's really where we are. Listen, freedoms are important, but I believe in freedom of the unborn, that they might have a life, that they might have the opportunity to experience all that God has called them to be.
Abby, if I could get your thoughts.
I mean, right now, abortion is hurting women. And, abortion is not helping women. Abortion is hurting them. Abortion is telling women that they are too weak to deal with the circumstances that are right in front of them. We have so many resources available to women who are in crisis pregnancies, who need help. And this is the time really for states and for pro-lifers, for the pro-life movement to really step up. We already are stepping up. We're filling in the gaps that need to be filled for women who are in need of help during their crisis pregnancies. And so this is really a time for pro-lifers to step up and say, I want to do something in this cause. I want to help my local pregnancy center. I want to help my local maternity home. This is going to take all of us as a collective movement to really help and stand up for these women.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today, President Biden touted Intel's $20 billion new investment plan in Ohio. He also urged Congress to pass legislation strengthening America's semiconductor supply chain.
This historic investment for Ohio, one of the largest investments in semiconductor manufacturing in American history. We're going to stamp everything we can made in America, especially these computer chips.
The semiconductor industry was created in the United States of America, and it's time for us to lead again.
During a White House press conference, Intel CEO announced a new $20 billion factory outside of Columbus, Ohio. It will create 7,000 construction jobs and another 3,000 permanent jobs. Chip shortages fueled by shutdowns during the pandemic have interrupted the production of new vehicles and electronic devices. And higher car prices are driving a significant part of the inflation in the country. It's also raising national security concerns as many American firms depend on chips produced overseas. The U.S. share of the global chip manufacturing market has declined tremendously over the past few decades. The Biden administration is pushing Congress to pass the CHIPS Act, which is contained in a broader competition bill. It will invest $52 billion to strengthen domestic semiconductor production and establishes a national technology center. The U.S. Marine Corps kicked out another 45 Marines for refusing the COVID-19 vaccine. This is according to a spokesman. Over 300 Marines have been discharged so far. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced the mandate in August of last year. Since then, 95% of active duty Marines have been fully vaccinated. 87% in the reserves are vaccinated as well. A few hundred have been granted administrative or medical exemptions, but so far only 2 religious exemptions have been granted. It is not known exactly what religious denominations those 2 belong to. On Capitol Hill, 2 more lawmakers test positive for the CCP virus. Democratic Congressman Rahul Grijalva from Arizona tested positive for the 2nd time on Wednesday. Congressman Grijalva said he's vaccinated and boosted. Republican Congressman Thomas Massey also tested positive. The Kentucky congressman tweeted yesterday that he suspects his mild symptoms are due to a previous infection. Congressman Massey is not vaccinated and has been a huge proponent for recognizing naturally acquired immunity. In recent weeks, a string of congressmen have tested positive for the CCP virus. Close to 9 million workers have called out sick due to a huge jump in Omicron cases. This is putting pressure on an already strained job market and supply chain. Omicron is less severe than Delta, but since infection numbers spike so rapidly, it is also putting a strain on hospitals throughout the country. And Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm is found to have violated the Stock Act 9 times last year. That's based on an analysis of her financial disclosure documents. The Stock Act requires federal officials to report any stock market transaction over $1,000 within 45 days after it is made. According to a report by Business Insider, Granholm made at least 9 such stock transactions between April and October 2021, worth a total of nearly $240,000. But she did not file the proper forms until mid-December of 2021. 54 members of Congress also failed to properly disclose their stock transactions last year. President Biden urges mayors across the country to spend more funding on infrastructure. He's also calling for more funding for the police. With this week marking President Biden's first year in office, his grades are still coming in. Polling shows that most Americans are concerned about rising inflation and the economy. We have the Republican leader of the House Budget Committee here to discuss. The Washington, D.C. Auto Show is back in town. Domestic and foreign manufacturers put their latest models on display. The D.C. area's vintage car clubs also rolled in a fleet of restored classics. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. Over 1,000 mayors across the country are gathering in Washington, D.C. for an annual conference. President Biden today is urging them to use more funds from the American Rescue Plan to build up infrastructure. Biden also made a call for more funding for the police. President Biden today addresses the annual Conference of Mayors. He encourages city leaders to use more funds from the American Rescue Plan and to implement the infrastructure bill.
I urge every mayor in America to follow suit, to use the resources, the rescue plan.
Major cities across the U.S. like Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, and Minneapolis are reporting record murder rates. Biden says more funding should go to the police.
We shouldn't be cutting funding for police departments. I propose increasing funding.
The Conference of Mayors represents cities with more than 30,000 people. The country has 1,400 such cities. This week marks President Biden's first year since taking office, and his approval rating is polling at an all-time low. Many Americans are deeply concerned about the economy and rising inflation. We had a chance to discuss the situation with Missouri Congressman Jason Smith, who spoke with us earlier. Now, Congressman, Biden just hit his 1-year mark since taking office. What's your assessment of his first year?
Well, I mean, I'm the Republican leader of the House Budget Committee, and if you just look at, from a budgetary lens, where we started out, his very first big proposal was what they called the American Recovery Act. We call it the Biden bailout bill. It was a $2 trillion bill that was passed in March that was supposed to be for COVID spending, but less than 9% of all of that $2 trillion bill went towards COVID spending. In fact, the other 91% went towards random items, such as spending $2 million to plant trees in Syracuse, New York, or almost $17 million for a golf course in Palm Beach, or even $1,400 stimulus checks to Japanese citizens who live in Japan. This $2 trillion spending bill is what fueled the inflation fire that we're in right now, that has led to the highest inflation in 40 years of over 7%. And then in May, President Biden issued the latest budget in the history of the United States for a president. He wanted to spend $68 trillion, the most spending in any budget in the history of the United States. In fact, it had the largest tax increases in the history of the United States. And then from there, decided to go towards the next reconciliation bill, which was the $5.1 trillion Build Back Broke bill that Senator Manchin said that he would not support, and that's dead in the Senate as we speak right now. His answer to the 40-year rising inflation is to spend $5 trillion more. You cannot inflate your way out of inflation, but apparently this administration, they feel like spending is the way that they can get out of inflation. In fact, it's the only way to drive up higher inflation. And if you look at the numbers from the Producer Price Index just last week at 9.7%, the highest that's ever been reported in that index, is an indicator that inflation is yet to continue to rise.
Now, Congressman, as you mentioned, we're beyond the point of inflation just being a political buzzword or a talking point. What do you think are some of the other key factors that are driving this?
Without a doubt, the number one factor of inflation is reckless, unpaid for government spending. Just last year alone, there's been more than $7.5 trillion in spending out of the House of Representatives. If you add what has been spent out of the House of Representatives since the Democrats took over in 2019, along with the president's budget that was passed this past year of $68 trillion, that spending is more than the combined taxes collected by all Americans since our country was founded. That right there is the number one rocket fuel that is fueling inflation right now.
Now, do you see a short-term solution to this problem, and how do we dig our way out?
First, you got to stop the spending. Stop the hemorrhage of spending. That is the first requirement, the first case. And then we have to definitely address the supply chain crisis. Supply and demand is also fueling inflation. And who would have ever thought that you would go to the grocery store to purchase hamburger and there's no hamburger? Who would have ever thought you would go to the grocery store to purchase basic household items and they're not there? And it's all about a supply chain crisis. It's very similar to what you see in countries that we never, ever want to be like in the United States of America.
Congressman Jason Smith, thank you.
Thank you. Great being with you.
America's drug epidemic has gotten worse since the pandemic began. The federal government seized enough fentanyl last year to kill every single American. Attorneys General of 16 states are urging Secretary of State Antony Blinkin to fight the spike in fentanyl. U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized 10 times more fentanyl in South Texas last year compared to the year before. That's nearly 600 pounds. The total amount of narcotics seized there is worth about $790 million. This week, attorneys general from 16 states urged Blinken to take a tougher approach to stem the influx of fentanyl coming in from China and Mexico. They stated in a letter that, quote, Chinese chemical manufacturers played a key role in this crisis by making and shipping fentanyl directly to the United States, and that the federal government has seemed content to stand by. Fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin, but it is extremely cheap to produce. The chemicals used are often shipped from China to the U.S. or Mexico. And Texas Congressman August Pfluger introduced a bill today requiring the Department of Homeland Security to publish the number of known or suspected terrorists attempting to enter the United States. President Biden vowed to restore key foreign alliances after taking office, but 1 year later he is still failing to nominate ambassadors to several important allies and partners, including Ukraine, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia. So far, the Senate has confirmed 56 ambassadors nominated by President Biden, but Biden is still failing to fill the top jobs in some key countries like Ukraine, South Korea, and the Philippines. He's facing criticism for leaving allies out in the cold and making them more vulnerable to Chinese and Russian influence. NTD's Anna Skabinski visited the first day of the 2022 Washington Auto Show for us to check out the cars coming our way and mingled with some car lovers.
After a year hiatus, the Washington, D.C. Car Show is back at the Walter E. Convention Center. On the floor were some of the world's biggest car makers. We also spoke to a few collectors here to showcase their precious vintage collectibles. Let's have a look at what they have.
Well, at the DC Auto Show, they have not only new cars, but they've allowed us to have some classic cars over there. We have Corvettes and Chevrolets and Lincolns, but behind me over here are Mustangs. These belong to the members of the National Capital Mustang Club. They're all individually owned. Some own more than one, and some of them are really nice competitive show winners, and a few are nice driver quality cars.
This is a 1967 Chevelle. He restored it. It took him several years, and in 2009 it won the best of the 8-cylinder era for the entire country in our club, because it was restored to its original factory design and restored well. I've had friends that have taken 40 years to do a restoration. This gentleman's brother owns a body shop, so that made it go a little faster.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Washington, D.C. Auto Show. Wow, that's a big camera over there. Whoa, dude. Here, let me hold on, let me show you guys what I see. Look at that.
DC residents and an interactive robot were excited to be back.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You know, this is the second time I came out here, and I'm very impressed with it. So I think they did a really good job with that. Just enjoying like a museum and bring him out. You know, today is his birthday, so he wanted to come look at the cars. So
make me feel happy, like and free.
Visitors told us what they want in a car.
Well, just pretty much any kind of all-electric or hybrid cars. Well, the range, obviously, room for our granddaughters in the back, and just enough cargo space.
The DC Auto Show will be at the Walter E. Washington Convention Center through next Sunday.
And that's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.